Go.
Okay, welcome, Michelle Chan. We're so happy to have you here to speak on our International Women's Day celebration, sponsored by the Welfare Warriors in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And Keisha, are you still with us?
I'm still here.
I want to introduce you. This is Keisha Wilder, our tech person who's been doing a phenomenal job getting all these great speeches and great women together here for International Women's Day. So thank you, Keisha.
No problem.
And so today we're going to be addressing again the issue of child protective services. This is the second segment of our event on which we're talking about ways in which moms have actually fought back and organized different groups in order to systematically fight back against the CPS system that is so brutal in family separation across the United States and so really lawless in terms of the reasons, since the children are being taken based on accusations, no proof. I just learned from Michelle, in fact, that in California, they don't even have a right to a trial, neither a jury or a judge trial. So where's the evidence? Where's the proof? Now in Wisconsin, we're allowed a jury trial in children's court. However, although it's allowed, they trick the families into not getting one by number one, the judge says, do you accept the court's jurisdiction or do you stipulate to the court's jurisdiction? The minute the mother's lawyer says yes, she's now got no right to a trial, and instead she's agreed to conditions and has to meet all the different conditions for all the privatized agencies and companies and so-called nonprofits that profit off of forcing families into a bunch of conditions. But you also lost your right to ever prove you're innocent or to make them prove you're guilty. And so that's one way they trick the women into never having a trial. But the other way is once we finally actually reach some women who were still at the beginning process, just after the probable cause finding, these were women who could ask for a jury trial because they hadn't yet given it up. Well, we found out that the judges and the district attorney and the guardian ad litem and the lawyer for the mother, that they would simply not allow her to have the trial, even though our state statute says within 30 days of requesting that trial after the probable cause finding, they're entitled to a trial, and they're entitled to, no one is supposed to be able to postpone that trial except the parent themselves. And in two cases where we got the moms early enough before they gave up to their right to a trial, those women, one woman, it took a year before they finally said, okay, you can have your children back. Because of course they don't want to go to trial. They don't know how, lawyers pretty much never have trials. And the second thing is they never have evidence in these cases, so they don't want to just lose. Another mom, it took 6 months before she was able to finally actually, again, they said, if you give up your trial, we'll give you your child back, your children. She had 3 children. And that's one of the tactics too, the reason we urge women to do that, not even so much because you want to have a trial, but because you want to let them know that if they don't give your children back, you will have a trial. And since they're taking these kids based on accusation, not evidence, they don't want to have a trial like that. One Mexican mom who didn't even know English, she spent a whole year, this is a third case, a whole year demanding over and over and over a trial to make them prove her guilt, or actually for her to prove her innocence, although the law is they have to prove her guilt. And so it took a year, and even after that year, when we went back for the day of the trial, there was no jury there. And they didn't even know where the jury was. They had no intention whatsoever. And remember, this is all illegal. No intention of letting her have that trial. Instead, we spent the whole day going from room to room, talking to the guardian ad litem, talking to the district attorney, talking to the caseworkers, with them trying to put conditions on her. They agreed to return her children to her 3 daughters. However, they wanted to put a bunch of conditions, and that's what took the whole day long. And of course, once they're willing to actually give the child, we want to be flexible about, as long as the conditions aren't too onerous, because otherwise, we would never agree to anything unless the children are going to be brought home that day or that week. And so that's what, in that case, the one obstacle was they wanted her to let the children see their aunt, who had actually initiated the removal of the children. And so we had to fight all day to win that one. But anyhow, so that's what's happening around here. Now let's get back to Michelle. Michelle, you're the founder, right? You're the founder of the California Families Rise. So, and you've also have been actually a survivor and a victim of the Child Protective Service agencies when they removed your son from you because you had suffered a battery from the father of your child, which is again a very common reason across the United States now that they're illegally taking and trafficking these children because of battery, not against the child and not by the mother, but rather by a man who's obviously committing a crime. And I know that after you separated from him, the CPS also gave your son custody of the batterer got custody of your son. So tell us a little bit about how this all happened, how long your son was away from you, and what you did to win him back.
Yeah, so my ordeal, and first, Pat, thank you for having me. Thank you for the work that you do towards this cause and uplifting the voices of poor women across the nation. So I was trapped in the system, and my son was trapped outside of my custody for 2.5 years. And
Mm, mm,
first, I want to state how incredibly strongly bonded we were. Um, every report that went down on record about my parenting ability, there was never any question about whether or not I was a good mother or whether or not my son loved me. And that is one of my biggest issues with the system, is that it has nothing to do with the best interests of children. It has everything to do with abuse. It has everything to do with discrimination and corruption. So I was a battered woman, and I was charged with failure to protect. Except my son was torn from me, and at the time he was still a breastfeeding child.
oh,
Um, he spent 6 really traumatizing months in foster care. And if I tell you, if you'd heard his cries, if you'd known how traumatized he was during the visits, saying, "Mother, I want to come home," and we're not allowed to say to them, "You're
right.
going to come home," and
Mhm,
he
mhm.
didn't know what was wrong. And they went and they treated me completely different than my then husband. It was a boys club. I could not believe how he was not being held accountable for being abusive, for being an abuser and a batterer. And meanwhile, the system was coming after me because I failed to protect my child. And I had a court appointed attorney, and my then husband had a uh, he had a private attorney that was really fighting for him because he kept all of our community savings, and I, who was a stay-at-home mother and a student when all this happened, had nothing. And I look back
Uh,
knowing we had a whole team of lawyers. How come none of the lawyers on the stopped and said, "Hey, this is unlawful. Half of his money is hers. Why does she have a court appointed attorney who is working against her at every step?" My attorney, my
mm,
whole case happened because of
mm,
my attorney. He sold me out at every chance he got. It was really, really evident. And meanwhile, I was treated different. And that's why I really feel strongly that this is a war against the poor. If I hadn't, it was because of my income status, it was because of what I didn't have that I was treated the way I was treated. It was because I was a woman and
mm,
I wasn't part
mhm,
of the boys club that
mhm.
I was. Let me ask you, how is it that I was charged with failure to protect, and then after my son is returned to us from foster care, why is he then given to the abuser and kept with the abuser for years?
Oh,
So my ordeal
what a
finally,
travesty.
yeah. Um, from there, I want to talk a little bit about my case and how we fought back. There came a certain point during my case that I realized that I wasn't going to win my fight inside the courtroom because I knew that my attorney was corrupt. I knew that the judge was corrupt. It was really obvious that they were all working against me. There were falsified reports that went down. There was, it was staggering the amount of misconduct that I actually had records of, because everybody in my case only communicated through email. I had a paper trail, and I was studying the law, and I knew that my rights were being violated, and no one cared. I would honestly bring it to court, and the judge would laugh in my face. So it became clear to me that no matter what I filed, no matter what I did inside the court, I was not going to win. So I took my fight to the streets. And that's when we decided, it was only me and one other, Shante Foster. Nobody else had the guts, and I don't blame them, to stand with us. We decided we were going to start a parents' rights activist group. And we decided that, it wasn't just that they were violating my rights. When I
Right.
started looking closely at the evidence and the law, I realized that everyone's rights were being violated really egregiously. And I really felt strongly that we just needed to come together. It's hard to prove that my rights are being violated or someone else's rights are being violated. But when we come together as a group, then how do you explain that in case after case after case, the same misconduct is going on? And then it becomes a pattern. Then it becomes obvious that it's not under resources or lack of resources or lack of training. And then it becomes obvious that it's corruption we're talking about. So we decided to come together and bring together a parents' rights activist group. And we hit it really, really aggressively. Circulated 20,000 flyers in the space of a month.
Wow.
It was in 1 month flat, we had everyone talking about us. We started protesting 3-4 times a week for 3-4 hours at a time. We had 3 megaphones. You could hear us protesting. Our voices echoed all through the courts, all throughout City Hall, across the street, all throughout the Judicial Council down the block. You could hear us. There were only 4 or 5 of us for the longest time, and you could hear us for a mile radius. You could hear us because we shouted until we were blue in the face. And the San Francisco Bayview newspaper heard us, and they invited me to start writing for them. And I started contributing a column in there every month.
Wow.
And people really started to listen. The court, I had an open case at the time. They gagged me. They put a gag order on me, which I violated. And
what happened when you violated the gag order?
Well, luckily at that point, I had managed to get a new attorney. So I met an attorney protesting, and I told him what's going on in my case and that I was being held hostage. And it was really egregious stuff. And when I told him that I could prove it and I had evidence, he actually thought, well, you've been out here every day, and I'm interested now. It went on. We were out there all the time. So he sat down with me. He agreed to meet with me. He looked at all the evidence that I had, and he was honestly floored. He was flabbergasted. He said, wow, this is going on. And he had never practiced a juvenile case before, and he took my case. So when I was charged with a gag order, he fought that. He helped me. He really he responded, and he managed to get me off the gag order.
So they dismissed the charge.
They dismissed the contempt charge for violating the gag order. And then it wasn't.
What did they say you did? How did you violate that gag order?
Oh, I published an article on my story. Yeah, no, I definitely violated it.
Did you include your son's name?
I included, but I wasn't, I included their names. So I wasn't actually gagged from talking about my son. I was gagged from talking about my case, about the misconduct in my case, about the social worker and the judge and the attorneys in my case. And I mentioned everyone in my case by name. But they basically didn't want me to implicate them in the wrongdoing they were doing, in the misconduct they were doing. So I went ahead and I took it as an invitation to blow them all out. And I did. So
that's why they dismissed it. That can't be illegal. It's only confidential for your child.
Shortly after I did violate that gag order, our judge stepped down from the bench.
Oh, congratulations. A
3.5
victory.
years before her elected term was up. And it was after she stepped down from the bench that my whole case was dismissed and my son came home.
Wow. Yeah. So that was a victory. You actually got rid of the judge who'd been harassing you and violating laws against you for how long? The whole 2.5 years, right?
Yeah.
The same judge.
The same judge.
That's a great victory. And how often did you say you were after you gave out the 20,000 flyers, how often were you protesting over there at the courthouse?
3 to 4 times a week, sometimes 5 times a week, for about 3 hours each time. We were there all the time.
Wow.
I
Wow.
mean, if you were doing any kind of business or if you lived downtown, you know what we look like.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
You knew what our voices sounded like. You knew who we were. We were those crazy those crazy 4 people that just wouldn't give up. And at the end
Wow.
of
So
the
you
day,
were so small group at that point too.
we were a small
It
group.
just
And I
shows that, there's a power and power among resistance, even if it's a small group. You
Yeah.
don't need a gigantic group to
No.
win some victories. So then you said after all these protests, the San Francisco Bayview newspaper heard about you and they
Well,
asked you if you wanted
they
to write a
actually
column.
invited us early on,
Uh,
and so it was actually funny how it wasn't an accident. So I wanted to write for them. I wanted them to cover us, but I had been turned down from everyone that I had approached for the past year, that I was scared to approach them. So instead of approaching them, I took the bus to the block where their office was on, and I plastered that whole 10-block radius with flyers
oh,
every single day for a whole month. I put a flyer on every car. I taped it to every lamppost. I stuck it to every door for
wow.
5 blocks surrounding there. But I never knocked. I walked past every day and I was like, I want to contact them, but they're going to say no. And so instead, I just stuck a flyer on their door, and I stuck a flyer on all their neighbors' doors. And sure enough, 3 weeks later, they called me.
Wow. And
You
they're
know,
probably the most progressive paper in San Francisco, aren't they?
they are fabulous. They are so independent. They're so
Right,
progressive. They have bolstered and stood behind so many causes, and they
right,
not
right.
only did they publish our stories, but they also gave me encouragement that had it not been for them, we would have given up a long time ago. It was Mary Ratcliffe from the Bayview who wrote me these emails of encouragement, telling me, I remember the day when we couldn't get people to come out for a police shooting, just telling me stories about social justice movements that and these tales and these fables, and I just these anecdotes that just really kept me going. It really, and just telling me that if we kept at it, there was no doubt in her mind that we were going
Uh-huh.
to make progress. And I didn't really believe her, but she insisted, and so we went along with it.
We
And
get that publication here in Milwaukee, so we know how progressive they are. They're
yeah,
fantastic, really, really amazing. And there's how old? They're like 40 years old.
yeah.
Our publication is 36 years old, but I think the Bayview, San Francisco Bayview is like 40 years old. So they've been around so long. Now, are you still writing for them?
Yes, I
You are.
don't publish religiously in their paper like I did at one point, where it was
Uh-huh.
every single month. But every few months, I definitely get a story in.
Really? Well, that's really exciting. Your whole, phenomenon going from the victim of CPS to becoming not only a survivor, but an organizer. And you're fearless. We need you in Milwaukee. We need you here with
Anytime.
all those flyering and relentless attack and resistance. That's really amazing. It's so powerful. How large is your group nowadays?
We have, I mean, when we were at our height, we had a few hundred members. We did.
Uh-huh.
And then we didn't have the capacity to keep it going at that time. And we started up again about 6 months ago, and now there's about 75 to 100 active members, and we're having events again.
I can't talk now. I'm on the radio. Bye.
And we're trying to build it back up. But we're still going strong.
Uh-huh. So are you helping other mothers get their children back home or other families to reunite?
So we do provide advocacy on a basic level. We don't have it's not one of our professional services. Like, we don't actually have people that are assigned to doing that. Right now,
Uh-huh.
we are helping parents mostly by keeping the system accountable, and through policy reform, and just by putting a spotlight on the system, because if
Yeah.
only the system, the judges and the social workers and the attorneys did what they were supposed to do, the system wouldn't be that bad. The problem is that no one's
Right.
following the rules. So
Right. Actually, the laws aren't that bad in most states. the CPS, the laws, you know, for protecting children. However, they just don't want to really protect the right children. They just want to target anyone who they think they can get away with. And that's one of the big problems. What else did I want to ask you? I forgot. What would you like to say about your group?
I want to say that what we've done is anyone can do it. I mean, you know, it's there. This is an issue that is near and dear to and so important to so many people. And I know that when I had an open case, part of the reason why we started the group was because I was embarrassed to talk about it. I was
Mhm,
embarrassed to admit
mhm.
that I had a case, and it was like I couldn't. I still can't. Sometimes I still can't just meet someone at like the supermarket or at the library and say, hi, I had a CPS case. You know,
Uh-huh,
it's just,
right. It's so
I can't.
stigmatizing.
But when
People
you
think
come
you're a drug
together,
addict if you had a CPS case, right?
but when you come together as a group, it can be something empowering, right? And the problem is, as long as we allow us to live, internalize the stigma, that's how
Right,
they keep us quiet. That's how they
exactly.
control us. That's how they keep us oppressed. It is so important that we come together, that we organize, and that we empower ourselves and others to stand together and
So
fight
how
for
can
freedom.
people reach you and your group?
Um, well, you can find us through our website, californiafamiliesrise.com.
Mhm.
And that will there's a contact form there that will bring you to us. Anyone can reach us there.
Okay, great. All right. Well, I want to thank you very much for joining us. Your story is so inspiring. I really like those 20,000 flyers you put out. And
I've actually done it a few times now.
yeah,
I
really,
think
and your
it's
refusal to
so-
stop, you know, and your insistence on fighting back, that's really great. And let's hope that, you know, California can, you know, there is one judge in California who opened his courtroom because the confidentiality is a really, really harmful provision. You know, it's a secret proceeding in those courts, and secrecy always breeds corruption. And as long as, you know, here they're really, really on you if you ever say your child's name in a protest or in a GoFundMe page. And so no matter what, as long as you're that mom and dad are in there alone and can't ever even talk to their own children about what's going on during their supervised visits, it gets to be a very corrupt system because it's all secret. And one judge in Los Angeles said, I want to open up this courtroom to let the public know what's happening in these courtrooms. I don't know. His name was Judge Nash. I don't know if he was able to continue it though or not, but that's another possible success, someone you could look into in California. So thank you so much for joining International Women's Day. Tomorrow is International Women's Day. Tomorrow we're going to be airing this. And I urge you to take a day off on International Women's Day. Don't do any work at home. Even if you have to do work for pay. The women like to go on strike for International Women's Day to show how much our work is important to the family and the community. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Pat.
Mhm.